The Parable of the Blobs and Squares. Governments like to do stuff. They think they can help and make people better. They're also answerable to the people, and they don't want to be seen to waste their money. And they take this responsibility very seriously. So seriously, in fact, that they count stuff and measure stuff and arrange stuff, so they can tell people where their money has been spent. It's really not that easy, and so they have to order the stuff in certain ways. But some things can't be counted, measured, and arranged. Let's call these things the problems. Sometimes the problems don't look like squares. Sometimes the problems involve people. And when problems and people come together, they aren't squarish. They are, well, blobbish. Blobs change and don't like being stacked and arranged and organized. Why, government wondered, did every time they try to solve a problem, did the problem get worse? Why don't these problems know what's good for them and stay put so that we can fix them? The government said, this isn't working. We don't seem to be able to get to the bottom of this. Who can we get to help us understand the problems better? But because the government is so responsible for how they spend people's money, they needed to find people they were sure they could trust to spend it wisely. They asked some people like them, who look like them and talk like them, and they gave the money to them because they trusted them to manage it, account for it, and spend it in a sensible way. And of course, they looked, well, a bit squarish. This is a big job, said the little squares. We must do our best to succeed. And so they set about developing the tools to do the job, the equipment, the institutional capacity, professional expertise. And they set about understanding the blobs better, because how could they help if they didn't understand the problem? They invested in the process for solving problems, and they invested in the infrastructure for solving problems. But no matter how much the squares tried to reach out into the community and understand the root causes of the problems, they never managed it. They really weren't able to get to where the problems were. They were, well, just too squarish. Oh dear, the government squares said to the little squares, this isn't working. And it wasn't. A gulf still separated the squares from the blobs. It wasn't working because however well they understood the problems simply weren't theirs. And no matter how hard they tried, the problems just wouldn't stand still. We've invested all this money, said the government, created all this expertise, built all this resource, but it still hasn't worked. And so they tried to bridge the gulf by asking the little squares to find blobs they could partner with. And so the little squares invited the blobs that seemed like they had the energy, vitality, and the drive to make a difference to work with them and sit on their boards as representatives. This time, they didn't just experiment on the blobs, they asked the blobs what they wanted and what they thought and how life should be. But this approach made the blob unhappy because it seemed to reinforce the difference even more. Oh dear, the squares said, this still isn't working. So they tried giving some of the money directly to grassroots organizations that were very blobby. They must be able to solve the problem, they thought, because you can't get closer to the problem than that. But to be trusted with the money, the blobs had to produce reports, attend training sessions, and write risk assessments. And by the time the blobs had done all this, something strange happened. They had ceased to be blobs and had become little squares. And by the blobs becoming squarish, they lost everything that made them blobs. Their energy, grassroots connections, vitality. And something more important happened. They became neither blobs nor squares. They lost their sense of what made them who they are, and they lost their sense that they could do something to help, that they could solve problems, and that they had an idea of how to make the world a better place. We think there is a different way. We think the squares are really good at some things, and we think the blobs are really good at others. We think co-production is a different way for squares and blobs to work together. While the squares may well be the experts in the process, the blobs have something equally important and something the solution needs: the context. Co-production is a partnership where the process and context have equal value, where squares and blobs need and value each other for who they are and what they can give. One is not more important or valuable than the other. It isn't about imposing a solution on the problem. Instead, it is about understanding that the solution can only lie in the problem. It is only through a process where the assets of both the squares and blobs are valued equally that great things can happen. Each one of us has a strength. As a professional is more than their job title, a person is more than their problem. Co-production matters! To find out more about co-production and a new way to do business, go to www.nomorethrowawaypeople.com.